Respect often hides in silence, not in applause, whispered the dim chandelier as it flickered above the grand dining hall of Jun Hyuk's Seoul estate, casting fractured light over the polished oak floors. The room buzzed with the clinking of fine china and murmured conversation as guests in tailored suits and designer dresses maneuvered around the long, ornate table. In the center, an antique vase caught a slant of morning light, illuminating the delicate hands of an elderly woman arranging the table's centerpiece. Her movements were measured, calm, precise, each placement of a cup or silverware a testament to years of care and unseen labor. She was the grandmother of Mai, the young black maid who stood at her side, her posture straight, eyes cast downward, absorbing every glimmer and shadow as if memorizing the room. Mai's gaze flicked briefly to the corner where Jun Hyuk, the Korean Mafia boss, leaned back in his chair, hands folded, his expression unreadable beneath the sharp angles of his face. He had been silent since the guests arrived, a figure of quiet authority that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Across the table, a group of wealthy business partners chuckled at a small, whispered joke, their attention drawn to the elderly woman, mocking her age, her attire, the way she stooped slightly as she carried out her task. The sound of their laughter felt disproportionate, jarring against the soft scrape of chairs and the gentle hum of an ornate grandfather clock. Mai's jaw tightened imperceptibly, a flicker of indignation passing through her otherwise composed demeanor, but she made no move to confront them, her hands steady as she carried a delicate teapot across the room. The camera's invisible lens would have lingered on the subtle tremor in the woman's hands, a tremor born not of weakness, but of a lifetime spent balancing dignity and service, of knowing the weight of unseen debts and long-held secrets. Jun Hyuk's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as he observed the scene, his lips a thin line, betraying nothing of his internal calculation. Somewhere deep within him, a flicker of recognition sparked, tied to a memory he had long buried, a connection to the woman's past that had once influenced his rise to power. The air grew thicker as the grandmother adjusted a napkin, her movements deliberate, commanding respect not through loud proclamation, but through the undeniable authority of presence. Mai, sensing the gravity of the moment, straightened fully, her shoulders squared, the faintest glimmer of resolve in her dark eyes. The guests' laughter faltered, hesitation creeping into their smiles, as if the room itself had shifted imperceptibly, drawn toward the silent tension between respect and mockery. Every footstep across the polished floor echoed like a drumbeat of inevitability. Each minor detail, the gleam of polished silver, the subtle sway of crystal glasses, the shimmer of sunlight through lace curtains, working together to build a scene thick with anticipation. And all the while, Jun Hyuk remained motionless, a silent sentinel whose presence alone demanded attention, until the faintest click of a chair settling signaled that the moment of reckoning was near. The room seemed to hold its breath, the soft rustle of fabric and whisper of silk blending into an almost sacred hush. Mai's eyes met her grandmother's for a fraction of a second, an unspoken understanding passing between them, a shared knowledge that something long hidden was poised to surface, and in that suspended stillness, the true weight of dignity began to press upon the hearts of everyone present. The chandelier's light fractured further, throwing intricate patterns across the polished floor, mirroring the complex interplay of power, humility, and latent justice that was about to unfold in the most unexpected of ways, leaving the room in a poised, tense anticipation of what the next moment would reveal. The murmur of the guests softened as the room seemed to collectively sense a shift in the air, a subtle tension that no one could place, but everyone could feel. Mai moved carefully between the table and the sideboard, her hands steady as she adjusted a small crystal bowl, the soft clink of glass against porcelain ringing with an almost musical precision. Her grandmother, seated gracefully at the head of the table, lifted her eyes ever so slightly toward the chandelier, letting the sunlight play across her silver hair. And in that moment, She radiated an aura that demanded acknowledgement without a single word being spoken. Jun Hyuk remained in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the armrest, eyes following every subtle movement, reading the room with the acuity of someone accustomed to power but unaccustomed to moments of moral weight like this. A few guests shifted in their seats, uneasy under the weight of silence, their previous amusement fading into a quiet uncertainty, sensing that the hierarchy they assumed was not as absolute as they had believed. I paused mid-step, a delicate teapot hovering above the tray, and allowed her eyes to meet Jun Hyuk's for the briefest instant. The contact was fleeting, yet charged with the knowledge of unseen histories, debts unspoken, and respect earned in quiet diligence rather than ostentation. The room's soft ambient light, filtering through lace curtains, highlighted the intricacies of the porcelain and silver, turning the table into a stage for a drama unfolding in hushed tones. The grandmother's hands, resting lightly on her lap, carried the history of decades, a life of service and wisdom, her presence alone a testament to endurance and hidden influence. Guests found themselves leaning slightly forward, drawn in by a force they could not name, captivated by the subtle authority that required no declaration, only recognition. Jun Hyuk's gaze sharpened as memories of past encounters with the grandmother surfaced, moments where guidance, counsel, and silent assistance had altered paths that led him to this very estate, this very moment. The sound of cutlery being rearranged, soft footsteps across polished floors, and a whisper of fabric were amplified in the heightened awareness of the room. Each small action a punctuation mark in the growing realization that the ordinary veneer of civility had cracked, revealing deeper truths. I set the teapot down with precise grace, her hands steady, her expression calm, yet there was a flicker of strength in her eyes that the guests could not ignore. Jun Hyuk rose slightly from his chair, a movement so subtle, yet so laden with intention that it rippled across the table like a silent command, his presence now an active force, acknowledging the weight carried by the elderly woman at the head of the room. The guests' conversation faltered, smiles dimming as their attention was drawn inexorably to the unspoken narrative that had been quietly unfolding. Light shifted, reflecting off polished surfaces, catching in crystal glasses and silverware, emphasizing the dichotomy between appearance and reality, mockery and earned respect. In that sustained hush, every participant in the room was conscious of the moral gravity that had quietly claimed the space, the invisible ledger of human dignity and acknowledgement beginning to balance itself. The grandmother inclined her head slightly toward Jun Hyuk, a gesture both subtle and commanding. And in that instant, the collective realization swept across the room. Decorum and power were not always held by those with the loudest voices, and respect, earned in silence and demonstrated through presence, had the power to still an entire assembly. The chandelier above flickered once more, its light splintering into hundreds of delicate rays, casting intricate shadows that mirrored the complexity of the relationships, the layers of history, and the unspoken acknowledgement of honor restored, leaving the room suspended in poised anticipation, ready for the next revelation to unfold. The sunlight shifted subtly through the tall windows of the Seoul estate, casting long, fractured lines across the polished floor, illuminating the quiet strength of the elderly woman at the head of the table. She moved with measured grace, her hands gently resting on the edge of the table as if guiding an invisible current of respect and authority through the room. I stood beside her, her dark eyes reflecting both anticipation and calm, a silent witness to the unspoken history connecting her family to Jun Hyuk. The guests, previously confident in their laughter and casual mockery, now sat in an uneasy silence, their gestures slowing, their expressions flickering with uncertainty as if sensing the invisible threads of accountability weaving through the room. Jun Hyuk's eyes, dark and precise, followed every movement, each subtle motion of the grandmother, and I resonating with memories of moments long past, when guidance and intervention had shaped paths that now led him to a reckoning he had not anticipated. The ambient sound of the estate, the soft rustle of silk, the gentle clinking of fine china, and the whisper of polished shoes across marble, amplified the gravity of the moment, creating a symphony of understated tension that commanded attention without uttering a single word. Mai, attentive and poised, adjusted a small silver tray, the action deliberate, precise, and filled with an elegance that belied her years of service, every motion signaling competence and dignity. The grandmother's gaze swept the room, acknowledging each guest not with words, but with the unmistakable authority of lived experience, a presence that demanded recognition and inspired reflection. Light played upon the crystal glasses and silverware, each reflection a quiet reminder of the fragility of assumption and the depth of unseen influence. Jun Hyuk, standing just slightly, allowed a shadow of movement to pass through the room, a subtle acknowledgement of the respect due, his demeanor composed, yet unmistakably aware of the weight of history pressing against the present. The guests shifted again, some leaning forward, eyes darting between the trio at the center of the room, sensing the silent power that had replaced laughter with contemplation. Every detail, the gleam of the chandelier, the polish of the oak, the gentle sway of curtains in the light breeze, contributed to the growing realization that influence and authority are often measured not by volume or intimidation, but by the quiet assertion of presence and integrity. Maya's hands rested briefly on the tray, a signal of the steady patience that had brought her to this moment, her eyes locking with her grandmother's in a mutual understanding of dignity maintained and respect silently commanded. Jun Hyuk's posture shifted subtly, a recognition forming in his expression that power and legacy are intertwined with the acknowledgement of those who have quietly shaped destinies. The grandmother, her features calm and unyielding, inclined her head slightly, the gesture echoing across the room like a chord struck on a finely tuned instrument, resonating with the moral weight of experience and the understated assertion of justice. The room, suspended in attentive stillness, became a canvas where the interplay of light, presence, and silent understanding painted a narrative of dignity restored and authority redefined, leaving every witness conscious of the delicate balance between humility, respect, and the profound impact of quiet, deliberate justice. The subtle tension in the grand dining hall deepened as Jun Hyuk took a measured step forward, the soft creak of his polished leather shoes against the oak floor carrying a weight that silenced any remaining murmurs. Mai, standing near the sideboard with a gentle poise, adjusted the placement of delicate crystal glasses, the sunlight refracting through them and scattering 1,000 tiny points of light across the table, each reflection a quiet echo of the complex relationships in the room. Her grandmother, seated with an elegance that commanded attention without demanding it, glanced briefly toward Jun Hyuk, a spark of recognition and unspoken history passing between them, subtle yet profound, a reminder of debts paid and influence exerted quietly through the years. The guests, now fully attuned to the shift in atmosphere, leaned slightly forward, their casual laughter replaced with a careful observation, aware that they were witnessing a moment where respect and acknowledgement carried more weight than wealth or position. Jun Hyuk's dark eyes met the grandmother's gaze with an intensity that spoke of reflection and recognition, his composed demeanor revealing the first cracks of internal acknowledgement, the realization that power is measured not just in command, but in the awareness of those who have quietly shaped the paths of others. Maya's expression remained calm, her hands moving with meticulous precision as she served tea, the act seemingly ordinary, yet imbued with the gravity of dignity maintained and recognition earned. Light shifted across the room, highlighting the intricate details of polished silver, crystal, and fine porcelain, each element contributing to the sense of importance that had quietly settled over the gathering. A faint smile touched the grandmother's lips, subtle and knowing, as she inclined her head slightly toward Jun Hyuk, a gesture that carried the weight of years of unspoken understanding and mutual influence. The room seemed to hold its breath, every subtle sound. The rustle of fabric, the soft click of heels, the quiet placement of utensils. Magnified in significance, each movement a punctuation in the unfolding narrative of quiet justice. Jun Hyuk's posture shifted imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement of the grandmother's presence and the respect due, his recognition of the interconnected history between them tangible despite the absence of words. Mai, sensing the growing gravity of the moment, allowed her eyes to meet those of the guests, conveying through stillness and composure the unspoken message that dignity and respect are forces that demand attention without spectacle. The chandelier above fractured the light once more, casting delicate patterns on the polished floor and reflecting the nuanced interplay of humility, authority, and moral recognition that now dominated the room. Guests found themselves drawn into the intricate web of respect being woven before them, aware that the hierarchy of mockery had been quietly undone by the subtle assertion of presence and the acknowledgement of historical debts. The grandmother's hands rested lightly on the table, a physical testament to her enduring influence, while Maya's careful movements mirrored the steadiness and patience instilled in her by years of observation and service. Every detail, the gleam of silverware, the soft sway of curtains in the breeze, the fragmented reflections from crystal, contributed to the cinematic tension of the scene, each element reinforcing the recognition that quiet justice and the acknowledgement of dignity can command more authority than any ostentatious display of power. Jun Hyuk remained poised, his awareness of the unspoken dynamics clear, as the room collectively absorbed the unfolding lesson that respect earned through humility and awareness carries a force capable of pausing even the most confident, and that the bonds formed through quiet, deliberate acknowledgement shape the course of influence more enduringly than overt authority ever could. The room remained suspended in an almost sacred stillness, the chandeliers casting fractured light across polished surfaces, illuminating every subtle movement and gesture with heightened significance. Mai stepped lightly toward her grandmother, carrying a delicate porcelain cup filled with tea, the steam curling upward like wisps of quiet anticipation, and set it gently before her with unwavering composure. Her grandmother nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the young woman's steadiness and the years of care that had honed her into a figure of quiet authority despite her role as a maid. Jun Hyuk observed this interaction with a growing sense of understanding, the rigid lines of his expression softening as he absorbed the layered meanings of each motion, the unspoken histories that had led to this precise moment. The guests, sensing the shifting dynamics, lowered their voices and leaned slightly forward, curiosity mingling with a hesitant respect, unsure how to navigate the unfolding tableau where conventional social hierarchies were subtly being redefined. Light filtered through the tall windows, scattering across crystal glasses and polished silver, creating patterns that danced across the table and seemed to reflect the intricate interplay of patience, dignity, and latent authority. Maya's eyes met her grandmother's for a brief, poignant moment, the silent communication between them conveying reassurance and mutual recognition of the invisible threads of influence they had maintained across generations. Jun Hyuk's hands, previously resting lightly on the armrests of his chair, shifted as if drawn by an invisible current toward acknowledgement, the first deliberate motion that signaled a recognition not merely of presence, but of enduring impact and historical significance. Each gesture, each measured movement, resonated within the room like ripples on a still pond, amplifying the sense that something profound and moral was taking place without a single overt declaration. The grandmother's fingers lightly traced the edge of the cup in a gesture that was at once contemplative and commanding, a subtle assertion of the respect that was owed, quietly reinforcing the hierarchy that mattered more than wealth or titles. Mai, aware of the tension and the weight of the moment, remained poised, her dark eyes steady and unwavering, projecting a strength born from years of observation, careful attention, and disciplined humility. Jun Hyuk's posture straightened imperceptibly, a silent concession to the authority that had quietly asserted itself, his mind replaying the history of guidance, assistance, and moral influence that he had once underestimated or overlooked. The ambient sounds, the faint scrape of fabric against polished floors, the whisper of a curtain stirred by a gentle breeze, the clink of fine china, heightened the sensory awareness of everyone present, rendering the environment a vessel for subtle revelation. Guests shifted uneasily, recognizing that their assumptions had been challenged, their laughter and casual arrogance rendered irrelevant in the presence of the quiet command of integrity and accumulated respect. The interplay of shadow and light accentuated the depth of every expression, every measured breath, making the room feel like a stage where dignity and silent justice performed an unspoken narrative. Maya's steady hand returned to the sideboard, her movements both careful and fluid, reinforcing the lesson that patience, poise, and attention to detail can hold authority greater than any loud proclamation. Jun Hyuk's gaze lingered on the grandmother, the realization settling fully within him that influence is often invisible, manifested not through overt displays, but through subtle, deliberate actions sustained over a lifetime. The room, now wholly attentive, absorbed the unfolding lesson, each individual acutely aware that the quiet assertion of respect and recognition had the power to redefine power itself, leaving a lasting imprint of dignity and moral clarity upon everyone present. The atmosphere in the dining hall grew even more charged with subtle tension. Every movement of the chandelier, reflecting 1,000 fractured patterns across the polished floor as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, highlighting the intricate detailing of crystal glasses and silverware. Mai moved with quiet precision, arranging a delicate tray of desserts, her hands steady and deliberate, the faint glimmer of confidence in her posture signaling an understanding of the room's shifting dynamics. Her grandmother, seated gracefully at the head of the table, lifted her eyes momentarily to scan the assembly, each guest now fully aware of the weight of the moment, sensing the delicate balance between power, respect, and legacy that had quietly asserted itself. Jun Hyuk, standing with a composed and measured presence, observed the pair with a gaze that reflected growing comprehension, the subtle recognition of past debts and unacknowledged contributions settling into a profound awareness of what true respect required. The guests, previously inclined to casual commentary and understated mockery, now held their positions with careful attentiveness, some shifting slightly, others leaning forward imperceptibly, all drawn by the magnetic, quiet authority radiating from the grandmother and mirrored in Maya's poised demeanor. Light danced across the polished table, bouncing off silver, crystal, and fine china, accentuating the elegance of the setting and the moral clarity of the moment, each reflection magnifying the interplay of patience, presence, and deliberate acknowledgement. Maya's movements, fluid yet restrained, projected a quiet command, the careful balance of service and dignity communicating more than words ever could, and her eyes met her grandmother's in a fleeting glance that spoke volumes of shared understanding and unspoken history. Jun Hyuk's posture softened subtly, a silent concession to the enduring influence and quiet authority of the woman who had shaped more than he had ever realized. His recognition of her legacy, forming a bridge between past and present that redefined the hierarchy within the room. The ambient sounds of soft fabric brushing against polished floors, the faint clinking of delicate porcelain, and the subtle whisper of air through drawn curtains heightened the awareness of each observer, transforming the room into a space where quiet moral authority dominated over ostentatious displays of wealth and power. Guests adjusted their expressions and body language, reflecting an acknowledgement of the nuanced lesson unfolding before them, an understanding that dignity, patience, and carefully sustained respect commanded attention far more forcefully than any loud assertion of influence. The grandmother's hands rested lightly on the table, her posture both relaxed and commanding, embodying the culmination of years of silent guidance and careful stewardship. while Maya's attentive gestures mirrored the same measured strength, reinforcing the invisible web of influence that had quietly asserted itself over the room. Jun Hyuk's gaze lingered on the grandmother and then on Mai, the realization settling fully within him that true authority is recognized not in overt dominance, but in the acknowledgement of those whose actions, though quiet, shape outcomes and define legacies. Each reflection of light, each measured breath, and each subtle shift in posture contributed to a palpable sense of anticipation and reverence, the room itself seeming to hold its breath, as if in recognition of the moral weight quietly but unmistakably being asserted. The guests, now fully absorbed in the evolving tableau, found themselves witness to a demonstration of integrity and respect that transcended conventional expectations, understanding intuitively that in this room, dignity had claimed its rightful prominence, and silent justice had quietly, irrevocably reshaped the perception of power. The moment stretched like a fragile thread through the grand dining hall, every detail accentuated by the fractured light spilling from the tall windows, catching on polished silver and crystal, scattering brilliance across the floor with deliberate chaos. Mai moved closer to her grandmother, her hands steady as she adjusted a lace runner along the table, the subtle act reinforcing a quiet command that seemed to settle over the room as tangibly as the sunlight. Her grandmother's eyes, calm yet sharp, swept across the assembly, recognizing each observer, weighing the influence of every glance, every whispered thought that had once seemed inconsequential but now carried amplified significance under the weight of unspoken recognition. Jun Hyuk, standing with a posture that conveyed both authority and contemplation, allowed his gaze to linger on the grandmother, tracing the lines of her face, the subtle gestures honed over decades that spoke of patience, judgment, and quiet influence. The guests, sensing the shift, lowered their voices, their casual confidence replaced with attentive observation, each one becoming acutely aware that a lesson in dignity and recognition was unfolding before them. A narrative far subtler, yet more powerful than any overt display of wealth or rank. Maya's eyes moved deliberately across the room, meeting those of a few of the guests for brief moments, her expression calm and unyielding, conveying that the strength in humility and the weight of patience could command attention without words. The grandmother inclined her head slightly toward Jun Hyuk, a movement so subtle it might have been missed, yet within it carried a cascade of acknowledgement and history, signaling a quiet confirmation that the balance of respect had shifted. Light danced across the delicate crystal glasses, reflecting the interplay of shadows on the polished floor, each flicker accentuating the layered dynamics of power, honor, and the invisible threads connecting past and present. Jun Hyuk's hands, previously resting at his sides, lifted slowly, a deliberate, almost ceremonial motion that conveyed recognition, a silent bow of understanding to the grandmother's enduring influence, the room absorbing the gesture with collective attention. The sounds of subtle fabric brushing against the floor, the gentle clink of silverware, and the faint hum of ambient life outside the windows amplified the intensity of the scene, every minor noise resonating as part of a delicate orchestration of moral weight. Guests shifted in, their seats leaning forward, some exhaling quietly as they processed the quiet command of authority being demonstrated through presence and poise rather than overt speech. Mai, sensing the peak of the unfolding recognition, allowed her posture to soften while maintaining an unspoken assertiveness, her hands resting lightly on the sideboard, embodying the lesson that quiet, deliberate action can hold the weight of influence greater than words alone. Jun Hyuk's expression softened further, a flicker of respect crossing his composed demeanor as he fully internalized the subtle yet profound lesson of the grandmother's presence, the accumulated effect of years of patient guidance, service, and integrity now commanding the room's attention. The air felt heavier with acknowledgement, light playing across polished surfaces like a visual echo of the moral gravity being asserted, every guest now conscious of the unseen authority that had quietly, irreversibly reshaped the room's social landscape, leaving dignity, humility, and quiet justice firmly established in their awareness. The room remained in a state of attentive anticipation, the fractured sunlight from the tall windows creating intricate patterns across the polished oak floor, each glimmer highlighting the quiet command of presence that now dominated the space. I moved with careful deliberation, arranging the final dessert plates along the center of the table. The subtle sound of porcelain sliding across polished silver punctuating the otherwise hushed atmosphere. Her grandmother, seated at the head of the table with an air of composed authority, allowed her eyes to wander over the assembly, acknowledging each guest with a calm and measured gaze that carried the weight of experience and unspoken history. Jun Hyuk stood near the corner, his dark eyes fixed on the grandmother, the lines of his face softening as he absorbed the significance of her gestures, the depth of her influence now unmistakable, commanding recognition without a word spoken. The guests, sensing the shift in power and the growing moral gravity, straightened in their seats, their murmurs fading into a careful silence as they became fully aware of the unspoken narrative unfolding before them. I paused, her gaze briefly meeting her grandmother's, a subtle nod passing between them, a signal of shared understanding and unbroken resolve that had been cultivated over years of patient observation and quiet action. The sunlight caught the edges of crystal glasses and silverware, creating a dynamic interplay of light and shadow that seemed to mirror the intricate web of relationships, influence, and recognition playing out across the room. Jun Hyuk's stance shifted slightly, the slightest inclination of his shoulders a silent acknowledgement of the grandmother's authority and the respect that was due, his presence now fully aligned with the quiet assertion of dignity that had steadily taken hold. Every movement, from the delicate placement of cutlery to the subtle sway of a curtain stirred by the gentle breeze, contributed to the cinematic tension, each element reinforcing the understanding that true influence is recognized not through loud declarations, but through patience, consistency, and moral weight. Maya's dark eyes scanned the room, capturing the reactions of the guests, her composure reinforcing the lesson that authority can be wielded through calm presence and deliberate action, the demonstration of respect and recognition subtly reshaping the hierarchy of attention and admiration. The grandmother lifted a hand slightly, a gesture so delicate it might have been missed, yet it carried with it the gravity of years of service, guidance, and moral influence, and the room responded as if in synchronous acknowledgement. Jun Hyuk's gaze lingered on the grandmother, and then swept to Mai, the realization of the depth of their combined influence settling fully in his mind, the acknowledgement forming a bridge across time, history, and unspoken obligation. The soft rustle of fabric, the gentle clinking of fine china, and the subdued shift of guests in their seats created a rhythm that underscored the unfolding tableau of dignity and respect, emphasizing the quiet yet undeniable power of measured presence and deliberate recognition. The chandelier above fractured the light further, scattering beams that caught in crystal and silver, each reflection echoing the complex dynamics of authority, humility, and quiet justice. The assembly remained captivated, every individual fully absorbing the lesson that respect and influence are often invisible forces, recognized through careful observation and acknowledgement, and that the subtle assertion of dignity has the power to transform the atmosphere, command attention, and restore balance in the most refined and profound manner possible. The room had settled into a profound stillness, the air thick with anticipation as sunlight continued to filter through the tall windows, casting complex patterns across the polished oak floors and crystal glassware. Mai moved with composed grace, her hands lightly adjusting a decorative napkin on the table, the faint rustle of fabric amplifying the meticulous care with which she conducted herself. Her grandmother's eyes followed every motion, sharp yet gentle, projecting decades of quiet influence and the subtle power of patience, each gesture commanding a respect that transcended titles and wealth. Jun Hyuk, observing from his position near the head of the table, allowed the weight of the moment to wash over him, his expression softening as he recognized the intricate web of history, guidance, and silent support that had long existed between the grandmother and his own family, a connection he had previously overlooked. The guests, sensing the subtle shift in atmosphere, adjusted their postures and lowered their voices, the earlier light-hearted banter fading into a contemplative silence, as if the room itself had become an instrument for a lesson in dignity and moral clarity. Maya's dark eyes swept over the guests, her posture poised and unwavering, conveying a quiet assertion of authority grounded in respect and careful observation, every movement deliberate and precise. The grandmother inclined her head slightly toward Junhyuk, a gesture at once subtle and commanding, signaling acknowledgement and a validation of unspoken histories that had quietly shaped the present moment. Light glinted off polished silver and crystal, scattering across the table in fragmented patterns, reflecting the layered dynamics of influence, humility, and recognition that now dominated the room. Junhyuk's hands, previously resting lightly at his sides, lifted in a slow, deliberate motion, a silent act of acknowledgement to the grandmother's enduring presence and moral authority, a gesture that reverberated throughout the hall without a single word spoken. The ambient sounds, the soft scrape of shoes across the polished floor, the gentle hum of fabric shifting, the delicate clink of porcelain, wove a rhythm that underscored the gravity of the scene, each subtle noise magnified in significance, accentuating the unspoken lessons being imparted. Guests leaned forward subtly, their attention captured by the precise balance of dignity, composure, and measured authority being displayed, realizing that influence often manifests in silence, presence, and patient action rather than overt speech or display. Maya's hands rested briefly on the sideboard, steady and confident, her calm expression communicating the enduring lesson of respect earned through meticulous care and steadfast humility. Junhyuk's gaze moved from the grandmother to Mai, comprehension dawning fully as he recognized the depth of their combined influence, the realization settling that authority is not merely exercised, but acknowledged and reciprocated through awareness and moral alignment. The intricate interplay of light, shadow, and reflection across crystal and silver emphasized, the theatricality of the quiet justice being demonstrated, every subtle movement contributing to the pervasive sense of moral clarity. The guests, now fully absorbed in the unfolding tableau, recognized that the hierarchy of attention had shifted, the demonstration of dignity and quiet power asserting itself over the presumptions of status and wealth, leaving the room enveloped in a contemplative awareness of the true weight of respect, patience, and legacy. The room was suspended in a delicate equilibrium, every surface reflecting the fractured sunlight that filtered through the tall windows, creating a mosaic of light and shadow across the polished floors and glimmering crystal. Mai moved deliberately, her hands adjusting a small arrangement of flowers at the center of the table, each motion imbued with a calm authority that had gradually transformed the atmosphere into one of measured respect and quiet reflection. Her grandmother's gaze remained steady and commanding, the weight of decades of experience evident in every subtle expression, a presence that conveyed moral authority without a single word. Junhyuk observed from his position near the head of the table, his dark eyes absorbing every gesture, every nuance of the grandmother's subtle motions and Maya's precise movements, the recognition of their influence settling fully within him. The guests, their previous casual demeanor tempered by the unfolding dynamics, adjusted their postures and softened their expressions, a collective realization dawning that hierarchy and authority were being redefined by patience, dignity, and subtle assertion rather than by volume or ostentation. Light refracted through crystal glasses and polished silver, scattering delicate beams across the table and floor, emphasizing the intricate interplay of presence, history, and recognition that had quietly reshaped the room. Maya's dark eyes briefly met her grandmother's, a flicker of understanding passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared purpose and the enduring impact of carefully cultivated composure. Jun Hyuk's posture shifted imperceptibly, a gesture of acknowledgement to the grandmother's quiet power and the legacy of influence she carried. The recognition forming a bridge between past acts of guidance and the current demonstration of moral authority. The ambient sounds, the soft brush of fabric against the polished floor, the delicate clink of fine china, and the gentle whisper of air through the curtains, accentuated the stillness, each sound magnified in significance as the room absorbed the weight of quiet justice being asserted. Guests leaned forward slightly, their attention captured by the unspoken narrative, understanding intuitively that the authority displayed through calm, deliberate actions carried more weight than any overt display of dominance. Mai, poised and steady, allowed her hands to rest lightly on the sideboard, her measured presence reinforcing the lessons of patience, humility, and dignified assertion. The grandmother inclined her head slightly toward Jun Hyuk, a subtle yet commanding gesture conveying the depth of unspoken histories and the acknowledgement of enduring influence. The room responding with a respectful hush. Light played across crystal and silver, accentuating every nuanced movement and expression, turning the room into a visual reflection of the delicate balance between power and moral recognition. Jun Hyuk's gaze traveled from the grandmother to Mai, comprehension settling fully, as he absorbed the quiet affirmation of respect and the enduring lesson that influence is often demonstrated in subtle, deliberate actions rather than overt declarations. The room, now fully engaged in the unfolding tableau, seemed to breathe as one entity, every observer acutely aware of the moral weight and dignity being demonstrated, understanding that patience, quiet recognition, and the careful exercise of authority had irrevocably reshaped their perception of power and the hierarchy within the space. The quiet tension in the grand dining hall had deepened, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, painting the room in warm, fragmented patterns across the polished oak floors and glimmering crystal. Mai moved deliberately to the sideboard, placing a delicate tray of teacups with measured precision, each motion radiating calm authority and reinforcing the still-growing acknowledgement of dignity and respect in the room. Her grandmother's eyes followed every movement, steady and discerning, carrying the weight of decades of careful guidance and the quiet influence of her moral authority. Jun Hyuk remained near the head of the table, his posture relaxed yet attentive, dark eyes fixed on the grandmother, the recognition of her subtle power settling fully within him as he understood the depth of her impact and the unspoken history that had shaped the room. The guests, sensing the shift in energy, leaned slightly forward in their chairs, the casual murmurs of earlier replaced by respectful silence. Each person now fully aware that the hierarchy of attention had shifted, that the power of patience, integrity, and deliberate action had quietly asserted itself. Mai's dark eyes moved across the room, her expression calm and unwavering, conveying a steady assurance that respect and influence can be exercised through quiet, deliberate presence, rather than ostentatious display. Light reflected from the crystal and silverware, scattering across the table in intricate patterns that mirrored the complex interplay of influence, recognition, and moral authority. The grandmother inclined her head subtly toward Jun Hyuk, a gesture charged with acknowledgement and understanding, signaling the culmination of years of unspoken guidance and reinforcing the weight of her moral authority in a room now attentive to the nuances of her presence. Jun Hyuk's hands moved slowly to rest lightly on the edge of the polished table, a motion of deliberate acknowledgement, an internal concession to the quiet power and respect that had been demonstrated throughout the unfolding scene. The soft sound of fabric brushing against polished floors, the gentle clink of fine china, and the subdued shift of guests in their seats created a rhythm that underscored the growing moral clarity, each small detail amplifying the significance of the quiet assertion of dignity and influence. Guests, fully aware of the lesson being demonstrated, adjusted their posture, their expressions reflecting an understanding that true authority is often exercised and recognized through consistent, deliberate action and subtle presence rather than through words or status alone. Maya's movements remained precise and composed, her hands resting lightly on the sideboard, a visual reminder that discipline, patience, and careful observation can exert influence far greater than any superficial display of power. Jun Hyuk's gaze lingered between the grandmother and Mai, a slow comprehension settling within him. The recognition of the combined strength and influence of the women before him clear in the firm set of his posture and the thoughtful tilt of his head. The interplay of light, reflection, and shadow emphasized the quiet drama unfolding, every element of the room conspiring to highlight the subtle shifts in perception, the realignment of respect, and the undeniable impact of patience, integrity, and deliberate action. The guests, now fully immersed in the scene, absorbed the lesson with a silent reverence, understanding intuitively that dignity, quiet justice, and moral authority had claimed their place, reshaping the room's social dynamics and leaving an enduring impression of respect, humility, and measured influence on all who witnessed it. The sunlight had shifted lower, filtering through the tall windows in warmer, softer beams that highlighted the delicate reflections from crystal and silver, casting long, fractured patterns across the polished oak floor. Mai moved with deliberate precision, carrying a small tray of fine pastries, each motion purposeful and measured, embodying the calm authority that had grown throughout the unfolding events. Her grandmother's gaze remained steady, her expression calm, yet commanding, radiating an authority forged through decades of careful observation, subtle guidance, and the quiet exertion of influence. Jun Hyuk, positioned near the head of the table, observed with a composed intensity, his dark eyes tracing every subtle gesture, every nuanced movement, fully absorbing the unspoken acknowledgement of dignity and respect that now permeated the room. The guests, sensing the profound shift in the atmosphere, adjusted their posture and softened their expressions, recognizing that the unspoken moral dynamics had redefined the hierarchy of attention and respect within the assembly. Light glinted off the polished surfaces of crystal glasses and silverware, scattering delicate fragments across the table, emphasizing the intricate interplay of presence, historical influence, and quiet authority that had quietly asserted itself. Maya's eyes briefly met her grandmother's in a silent exchange of understanding, conveying reassurance, mutual recognition, and the unbroken continuity of careful, patient cultivation of composure and dignity. Jun Hyuk's hands moved slowly to rest lightly on the polished table, a subtle acknowledgement of the grandmother's enduring influence and the moral weight she carried, his posture revealing comprehension and respect without the need for overt words. The ambient sounds, the gentle brush of fabric against polished floors, the faint clink of porcelain, and the subtle stirring of curtains in the light breeze, combined to form a rhythm that punctuated the scene, each small noise magnified in significance and reinforcing the weight of the quiet assertion of justice and recognition. Guests leaned forward, fully attuned, understanding that the demonstration of authority and respect being displayed relied not on words or overt action, but on the steady and deliberate exercise of presence, patience, and moral integrity. Mai allowed her hands to rest lightly on the sideboard, maintaining a composed stance that reinforced the lessons of attentive observation and measured influence. The grandmother inclined her head slightly toward Jun Hyuk, the gesture delicate yet powerful, a signal of acknowledgement, continuity, and the unspoken history of guidance that had quietly shaped outcomes over time. Light and shadow danced across the polished surfaces, highlighting the nuanced expressions and movements that conveyed the complex interplay of humility, authority, and moral recognition. Jun Hyuk's gaze moved between the grandmother and Mai, his comprehension deepening, the recognition that true influence is exercised subtly, patiently, and with consistent integrity, settling fully within him. Every guest, now completely engaged in the unfolding scene, absorbed the lesson being demonstrated, understanding intuitively that patience, humility, and quiet assertion of dignity have the power to reshape perceptions, command attention, and leave an enduring mark on those who witness them. The room itself seeming to resonate with the moral weight and clarity established by the women at its center, leaving a lasting impression of refined authority, respect, and deliberate justice upon everyone present. The room seemed to hold its breath, every surface reflecting fractured light that danced across polished floors, silver, and crystal, casting intricate patterns that echoed the complex emotions of the assembled guests. Mai moved with unwavering precision, setting the final piece of the tea service upon the table, her dark eyes calm yet resolute, radiating the quiet authority that had steadily transformed the atmosphere from tension to reverent attention. Her grandmother, seated with composed elegance at the head of the table, allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, acknowledging each guest with a measured understanding that conveyed both patience and moral authority cultivated over decades. Jun Hyuk, near the head of the table, absorbed every subtle motion, every nuanced gesture, his posture straightening imperceptibly as the full weight of recognition and understanding settled within him. The guests, sensing the culmination of an unspoken narrative, leaned forward, their previous murmurs extinguished by a collective awareness that they were witnessing a demonstration of influence, dignity, and moral authority far beyond conventional expectation. Light filtered through the windows in warmer, softer beams, glinting off crystal and silver, emphasizing the layered interplay of past deeds, quiet patience, and deliberate recognition that had led to this moment. Mai's glance toward her grandmother held a brief but profound exchange of acknowledgement, a silent affirmation of shared understanding and the subtle power inherent in calm, deliberate presence. Jun Hyuk's hands rested lightly on the table, a silent act of acknowledgement, a measured bow of comprehension that recognized not only the grandmother's authority, but also the enduring influence of Mai's steady composure. The ambient sounds of soft fabric brushing against polished floors, the delicate clink of porcelain, and the faint hum of air through the curtains underscored the cinematic quality of the moment, each subtle noise magnified as the room absorbed the weight of quiet justice and deliberate respect. Guests adjusted subtly in their seats, their expressions reflecting understanding and reverence for the lesson unfolding, recognizing intuitively that the hierarchy of power could be redefined by patience, integrity, and the deliberate exercise of dignity. Mai's hands rested lightly on the sideboard, her presence reinforcing the notion that influence is often established through consistency, attention to detail, and moral steadiness rather than force or proclamation. The grandmother inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, respect, and continuity that echoed through the room, confirming the subtle yet profound impact of history, patience, and quiet authority. Light danced across the surfaces, highlighting the interplay of shadow and reflection that mirrored the shifting dynamics of influence and moral recognition. Jun Hyuk's gaze moved deliberately between the grandmother and Mai, comprehension settling fully within him, the understanding that authority is most enduring when exercised with deliberate, measured respect and accompanied by recognition of those who have quietly shaped outcomes. The guests, now completely absorbed, understood that dignity, quiet justice, and careful acknowledgement could command attention and reshape perception with far greater force than any ostentatious display, leaving the room enveloped in a reflective, almost sacred awareness of the moral weight and enduring clarity demonstrated before them. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.